Now, love her or hate her, I think without question one of the most well-developed and fascinating characters in all of Star Wars is Ahsoka Tano. And not only that, but of all the mysteries that currently exist within the Star Wars canon, perhaps some of the most intriguing are what exactly happened to her after Ezra saved her via the World Between Worlds, and what has she become since? Because I don't know about you, but I distinctly got the impression that the Ahsoka we saw in the closing shots of the series finale of Rebels has truly become something. But what might that be? First of all, let's quickly talk about something she isn't and never was, and that's a Grey Jedi. And yes, I know there are people out there who love this idea and love to slap the label of Grey Jedi on whoever they can, wherever they can, but Ahsoka is one example where it really doesn't fit, and not at all. Because let's not forget that Ahsoka herself rather adamantly tells Vader during their duel that, "I am no Jedi," so I think she'd very much balk at the idea of being called a Grey Jedi, or a Jedi of any type for that matter. And I think this has a lot to do with just how disillusioned she no doubt became with the Jedi after they wrongly accused her of a bombing in a hangar of the Jedi Temple during the Clone Wars, an act that was actually perpetrated by Barriss Offee, who was once a good friend of Ahsoka's. And Barriss's words after being discovered no doubt rang true with Ahsoka on some level, after all she'd gone through, about how the Jedi had basically become that which they'd sworn to destroy, that they had fallen from the light to the dark side and were responsible for the war. In other words, they had become blind and full of fear. Yet, even though Ahsoka turned away from the Jedi Order, that doesn't mean she gave up entirely on its ideals, or should I say, the ideals the Jedi should have been holding to. In fact, in the book titled simply Ahsoka, we see some of her struggles in the years immediately after the Clone Wars ended, and despite the danger to herself for being a former Jedi, she helped when and where she could against the Empire, and even started a small rebellion on the planet Rata, which eventually got noticed by Bail Organa, which led her to become a Fulcrum agent and a key member of the early rebellion. But it's something else that occurred during this time period that shows she was still very much strong with the light side of the Force, and that is when she encountered and defeated Sixth Brother, one of Vader's Inquisitors. And after the fight she took the kyber crystals from his double-bladed saber and was able to use the Force to cleanse them, and then construct two sabers with pure white blades. And if you weren't aware, Sith lightsabers are red because they take kyber crystals and corrupt them by essentially pouring their hate and anger into them, up until the point where they bleed, which explains the crimson red color of their blades. Some people, however, aren't a fan of this new explanation for red sabers, but it is considered canon. Anyway, these two white lightsabers are no doubt meant to symbolize a very strong connection to the light side of the Force, that she is still essentially a servant of it even though she no longer considers herself a Jedi or adheres strictly to their code. Let's also not forget that during the Clone Wars, Ahsoka died while on the strange world of Mortis and was brought back to life by the daughter, who may very well be a manifestation of the Ashla or light side of the Force itself. Furthermore, some aspect or avatar of the daughter, even though she apparently died, seems to still be with Ahsoka in the form of a convor she sees from time to time. We even see the convor with her in the World Between Worlds. The tricky question here for Ahsoka, though, is, in the time period after the Clone Wars, when she clearly does not consider herself any type of Jedi, if she still listens to and adheres to the will of the Force or not, or if she instead follows her own moral compass, if you will. Now, you might say, what's the difference or big deal? But in theory, someone wielding the light side of the Force for their own agenda, even one seen as good or noble, can be just as dangerous to the balance as someone using the dark side for their own agenda. We need only look to the Jedi of the prequel era to see an example of the harm that can be caused by those who ignore the will of the Force and use the light side to do what they deem is right, or in the case of the Jedi at that time, what the Senate or Republic deems is right. Simply put, the Jedi of that time failed and fell out of favor with the Force, so much so that they couldn't see a Sith Lord sitting right under their nose, and were ultimately destroyed because, though still acting in what one could argue was the best interest of the galaxy, they were not adhering strictly to the will of the Force, and were thus unbalancing it. They were part of the problem. So, going back to the question, I think it's very important to discern whether or not Ahsoka was acting on behalf of the Force by listening to its will, or just doing what she felt was right. And answering this question may also begin to answer what she may now have become when last we saw her at the end of Rebels, because I personally think Ahsoka was acting when and where she personally thought was right. And that's because I think Ahsoka is a truly good person, which may sound like an obvious statement, But what I foresee being the greatest difficulty for a Jedi, and for Ahsoka, is not acting when every fiber of your existence says you should do something or help someone, but the Force does not will it. An example of this is when Qui-Gon Jinn says in Episode 1, "I didn't actually come here to free slaves," when talking about saving Anakin. And this on the surface seems like an odd statement, because you might counter by asking Qui-Gon, "Well, you're a Jedi. What does it matter if that's why you came here or not? The opportunity now exists to do the right thing and help out an enslaved person. So why wouldn't you do that?" But it's not that simple for a Jedi, because if the Force does not will it, a Jedi is not going to act, even if it means a boy stays enslaved, which sounds horrible. And it's only later, when Qui-Gon begins to realize the Force has led him here to this boy, that he acts and does what he must to save him, because that is what the Force wills of him. So going back to Ahsoka then, I think it's very possible that her guilt from leaving the Jedi Order and leaving Anakin initially drives her to do what she feels she must, and what she feels is right, after the Jedi are all but wiped out and the Empire takes control of the galaxy after the Clone Wars. It's not the will of the Force that she follows, but her own will to try and put things right. And this guilt leads her to confront Vader, who she knows is her former master Anakin Skywalker. And thanks to a tweet from Dave Filoni, where he shared part of a conversation between Ahsoka and the Bendu shortly before she left for Malachor, where she'd of course face Vader, we know that the Bendu foresaw change and even death as a result of this encounter. And when Ahsoka asks if she's going to die, the Bendu responds that he doesn't know that, because that wasn't the death he was speaking of. Instead, it was the death of the Ahsoka she had once been, a guilt-ravaged person who no doubt regretted her decision to walk away from Anakin, especially after learning that he had become Darth Vader. But after this encounter, she realizes that not only can she not save him, but she is not responsible for what he has become. Rather, Anakin himself is. So what I think Ahsoka has become as a result of this confrontation with Vader, where her old self dies, is something more akin to what the Bendu is, and I do plan on making a video specifically about him in the near future. Basically, Ahsoka has seen more and understands the nature of the Force better than most ever will. A brief recap of her life shows that she was a Padawan to one of the greatest Jedi ever, Anakin Skywalker, and that she went to the strange world of Mortis, where, again, she died and was brought back from the Cosmic Force, where who knows what, if anything, she may have seen or encountered there. Then there's the fact that an aspect of the Force itself, that being the daughter, is a companion of sorts of hers. She faced Darth Vader, perhaps the greatest Sith ever, and during this fight was pulled into and made aware of the existence of the world between worlds. And before that ever happened, she encountered and apparently was given wisdom from the Bendu. In other words, Ahsoka has pretty much seen and done it all, and I'd have to imagine all these experiences have enlightened her to the point where she realizes the Force is beyond ever being fully comprehensible. That instead of seeing the Force as light and dark, she sees just the Force, and understands it's the inevitable battle between these two sides, these two aspects, the light and the dark, that are at the root of the problem concerning balance in the Force, which is also the basis to being able to understand the Bendu, I believe. Anyway, you might think that what I'm describing here sounds a lot like what Luke Skywalker believes in The Last Jedi. However, the flaw in Luke's thinking is his belief that a Jedi believes somehow the Force belongs to them, which is flat out wrong. Rather, a true Jedi, such as Qui-Gon Jinn, understands they are merely a servant to its will, and will not act against it, even to do what seems morally right, like freeing an enslaved child, for example. In fact, the problem a true Jedi faces is one of the things the prequels, through the struggles of Anakin Skywalker, highlighted extremely well in my opinion, and it relates to the struggles of Ahsoka as well. In one respect, as Anakin himself basically says, you need to have compassion, which he claims is essentially unconditional love, yet you have to do it without attachment, without personally becoming invested in the fate of others or anyone in particular. So somehow at the same time you need to care enough about others that you devote your entire life to them, yet not care so much that it ever influences your actions, which seems like a hell of a contradiction. You somehow need to be the very epitome of selflessness, which is not easy for any being with even a shred of ego, which we all have. And had Luke perhaps cited something along these lines as the reason he gave up being a Jedi, then maybe, just maybe, I'd be at least a little more open to the way his character was in The Last Jedi. But I digress, because I'm not here to talk about Luke or that movie at the moment, but rather Ahsoka and what she has become. And what I truly think she is someone who has accepted the fact that it is almost impossible to be a true Jedi, especially for her, that she does not have it within herself to only use the power she has, or her Force sensitivity, to carry out the will of the Force, that she will carry out her promise to Ezra to come find him, made when they were in the world between worlds together, and then, much like the Bendu, she will exile herself and become little more than an observer of the never-ending struggle between the dark and the light. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think Ahsoka has become and what her future might be. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.